This video is relating to the subject Fundamentals of Management and Life Skills prescribed for first semester BCom students of Bangalore University. This is session 43, Unit 4 Communication Skills, and in this session we're going to discuss the various measures to overcome the barriers of effective communication. At the end of the session, the students will be able to understand the various measures to overcome the various barriers to effective communication. Now, what do we mean by barriers to effective communication? Effective communication is a means of conveying in the best possible manner the message that is intended by the sender to the receiver. Now, the barriers are obstacles in this transmission. So, whatever comes in the way of effectively communicating, that's called as a barriers. Now, all these barriers need to be removed. And how do you remove it? There are certain measures that could be adopted by organizations which will help them in making sure that there is effective communication by removing barriers. And these are some of the steps which will enable you to do so. Now, barriers can be overcome only with the conscious efforts of both the sender and the receiver, because the barrier can arise at both ends. It could be at the sender's end or it could be at the receiver's end. So it is the responsibility of both the sender and the receiver to make sure they take certain steps to remove these obstacles. So the first we're going to discuss sender's responsibility. Being the initiator of the communication process, the sender has certain responsibilities. First one, setting appropriate communication goals. The sender should make sure that there are clear goals for communication. He should know what he is trying to convey through communication. So there has to be appropriate communication goals, and depending upon the purpose, modes of communication should also vary. You can't use the same communication mode for all kinds of information and communication. Depending upon the kind of communication that is to be done, you have to change the mode which is necessary. Using appropriate language, the sender should structure the messages in a way that will make clear and understandable to receiver. So you should use simple and appropriate words and avoid jargons. Jargons are technical terms. Sometimes in order to make communication effective, you should avoid certain jargons. Don't use too much of technical knowledge. Don't use some fancy language, because you may be very equipped with your language skills, but the other person may not be. And your purpose in communication is not to exhibit your communication skills or language skills, but to make the receiver understand the message. So you have to keep your language simple, use proper words, don't use too complicated words. Then practicing empathic communication. You have to show empathy towards the other person. You should always communicate keeping in mind the reference of the receiver. Okay, every receiver will have certain assumptions, attitudes and beliefs. Now you have to keep that in mind to understand how the message will be received and interpreted, and based on it you should do your communication. This form of communication is known as empathic communication. Empathy is showing or trying to understand others' feelings. So here also you're trying to understand the feelings of the receiver, because it is the receiver who has to understand the message. So you should know what is his framework of reference, how does he perceive a message and how does he understand it. Based on that you should practice empathic communication. Then improving communicators' credibility. Now, expertise and trustworthiness of a communicator is very, very important. Only with this credibility, they can be increased, they can be proper communication. Only if the receiver trusts you, then only he is going to understand the message. Unless there's that trust that has been built by the communicator, it's very difficult to have effective communication. Now, how do you improve the sender's credibility? This can be increased by mastering the subject of communication and building up trustworthiness. Okay, your credibility can be improved by ensuring that you increase your knowledge of the subject of communication, and you should also make sure that you're capable of being trusted by the others. Then encouraging feedback. Feedback enables the sender to know whether the receiver has understood the message or not. So, it's very, very important that you get proper, adequate feedback from the other party and you lay emphasis to such a feedback which is received. So, two-way communication promotes effective communication. Using face to face communication, effective communication always is being said to be achieved through face to face rather than through memos or letters. So it's always better to talk to people face to face, talk to people directly so that you can understand the messages better rather than written communication or memos or letters. Further, people are more comfortable expressing themselves when talking rather than writing. All of them will not be equipped with the writing skills, so it's always better that you have people talking because they could express themselves better when they're talking rather than writing. Using a correct amount of redundancy is the repetition, the number of times that you can repeat yourself. Okay, if a message is very complicated or important, make sure that you repeat it in several different ways so that the receiver will understand it. At the same time, unnecessary redundancy or overuse of cliches, however, will make the message dull to the receiver. You should repeat it, but it should not become overly repetitive. You should not have too much of use of repetitiveness or use of cliches. That will make the message dull to the receiver. He may not appreciate it. Developing a trusting climate. Effective communication cannot take place if a climate of trust does not exist between sender and receiver. If there's no trust between sender and receiver, then there's no communication which is complete. Both of them should trust each other to get that information. Using pictures, it is said that one picture is worth 1,000 words. Sometimes a picture can convey a lot of information that words cannot convey. And even a very lengthy message can be conveyed through a simple picture. So, use illustrations and charts to put across the message clearly, but make sure that the picture that you're trying to fit in is complementary to the message that you're sending and not something which is contradictory, not something which is against the message. It should be something which will help people understanding the message that you're trying to convey. Now, these are the sender's responsibility. Now, if the sender makes sure that all this is being followed, then the barriers from his end will be removed. Now, we'll see what is the receiver's responsibility. The receiver of a message has greater responsibility to make the communication effective. If the receiver plays his part well, communication can be very effective irrespective of the barriers. Now, what are the roles of the receiver? First one, effective listening. Okay, we're not just talking about listening, hearing, we are talking about listening. Hearing is something that you do physically when words come and fall into your ears and you're not paying attention. Listening is much more than hearing. Listening is about comprehending what you're trying to hear. Okay, trying to understand what is happening, trying to pay attention, trying to understand what is being done. So listening can be more effective, much more than effective communication. Then avoiding evaluative judgments. Don't make evaluative judgments. Don't have preconceived notions. Take the message as it is. Don't have things in your mind which will help you in making decisions. Just keep it very simple. Don't make judgments. Treat each message or communication on its merit and try and understand only whatever is being told. Then providing responsive feedback. Now, every message starts and ends with a feedback. It starts with a feedback because only through feedback you get the inputs for the next communication. So every communication starts with a feedback and also ends with a feedback. So for you to understand whether the message has been conveyed properly or not, it's very important that you get proper feedback from the recipients. So a receiver's responsibility would be to give a proper feedback of understanding, of knowing what is being conveyed to you, and then only the sender will understand whether his communication has been effective or not. So keeping all these in mind, all these steps in mind, and through active participation and contribution made by both the sender and the receiver, you will be able to remove the barriers and make the communication very, very effective.